He is known across centuries as the lurking whisperer, the ultimate adversary, and the father of bitterness. In the rich tapestry of Islamic tradition, the devil is conceptualized in a way that is profoundly different from how he is commonly understood in mainstream Christianity. He is structurally not a fallen angel waging a cosmic military war against the heavens, nor does he possess the power to compete directly with God for dominion over humanity. Instead, he plays a far more insidious psychological role, tempting, deceiving, and challenging human beings from the deepest shadows of their own minds. Over the centuries, countless Muslim scholars, mystics, and philosophers have wrestled with what this figure stands for and what moral lessons his unique story holds for believers. One of the primary titles given to this entity is Ash-Shaytan, which translates literally to the devil or the Satan. He is also frequently referred to as Al-Adu, meaning the adversary, which functions as a direct translation of the ancient Hebrew word Satan. However, the Holy Quran gives him a specific, chilling personal name, Iblis. So, who exactly is Iblis? Where did he come from? What is his metaphysical deal? And why is he so endlessly obsessed with leading mankind astray? While Islamic tradition is incredibly diverse, encompassing almost 2 billion Muslims globally today, it is a universal belief that Iblis acts as a corrupting spiritual force, seducing the sinful and actively luring them into the fiery depths of Gehenna or hell. He specializes in inducing impious behavior in those he can deceive, particularly targeting vulnerabilities like pride, envy, lust, gluttony, greed, and hatred. According to traditional law, he can remain completely invisible or take virtually any human form he chooses, with the single sacred exception of the Prophet Muhammad. He can manifest vividly in human dreams, or even enter people's physical bodies like a creeping disease. He is also said to actively distract believers during their daily prayer, making them forget how many times they have prostrated, or jumbling their sacred words so that the prayer becomes invalid. One of his absolute signature moves is whispering sinful suggestions directly into the ears of anyone who will listen. In fact, Islamic theology has a specific Arabic word for these dangerous inner whispers, waswasa, a word that linguistically even sounds like a quiet whisper. One famous historical hadith attributed to the Prophet Muhammad illustrates the extreme ways Iblis goes to disrupt prayer. The story goes that a man was mentioned to the Prophet who had accidentally slept straight through his morning prayer. The Prophet responded by saying that Satan had urinated in the man's ears. To be completely clear, the vast majority of modern Muslims understand that the Prophet was speaking metaphorically here to frame missing prayer as a severe result of satanic interference. Iblis also commands an army of lesser devils known as the shayatin, but these devils are not the red-skinned, horned creatures with pitchforks popularized by Western pop culture. In fact, the Quran is explicit that these shayatin can manifest as either wicked humans or as jinn, which are distinct supernatural beings created from smokeless fire that possess their own free will to be good or evil. Therefore, devils are not seen as a separate biological species in Islam. Rather, it is their conscious, active opposition to God that makes a human or a jinn devilish in nature. Openly condemning and rejecting Iblis is a vital signifier of faith for practicing Muslims. One common way they do this daily is through the ta'awud, a short protective prayer recited before reading the Quran or beginning any important task, which states, "I seek refuge in God from the cursed devil." Another major public example occurs during the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, which every capable Muslim is expected to perform at least once in their life. One of the central rituals conducted during this pilgrimage is the stoning of the devil, involving the literal throwing of pebbles at a series of massive walls in the Valley of Mina. This ritual commemorates the historical story of the prophet Abraham. According to tradition, when Abraham was preparing to sacrifice his son Ishmael out of obedience to God, Iblis appeared multiple times to talk him out of it, but Abraham resisted fiercely. Each time Iblis showed up to tempt him, Abraham threw stones at him until the devil disappeared into the earth. Just like in the Christian tradition, Iblis is identified as the prime culprit who tempted Adam and Eve out of paradise. though in the Islamic narrative, he notably does not show up in the form of a serpent. For example, a famous 14th century historical drawing of Adam and Eve in the garden depicts Iblis simply as an old, bearded man standing nearby. This human-like depiction actually lines up with how many Muslims understand Iblis more broadly. Unlike in Western Christianity, where Satan is described as a glorious fallen angel, most modern Muslims believe Iblis was never an angel at all. Instead, he is seen as one of the jinn. It is also important to note that Iblis is not viewed as the ultimate, independent source of evil in Islam. While he tries to trick mortals into committing wicked acts, he is not the cosmic creator of that evil. In fact, the story of his fall from grace told in the Quran explicitly shows that he operates only because he has received God's permission to tempt humanity. The core Quranic narrative goes like this. When God created Adam from earthly clay and breathed life into him, he called together all the heavenly hosts and commanded them to bow down before this new human. All obeyed, but Iblis refused. When God sternly asked him why he refused to bow, Iblis proudly replied, "Since you created me from fire, and you made Adam only from clay, I am inherently superior to him, and I will not bow." For that blatant act of defiance and pride, God expelled Iblis from the heavenly council and placed a cosmic curse upon him. But before he left, Iblis made a clever request. He asked for a delay in his ultimate punishment. He wanted to be allowed to freely roam the earth until the final day of resurrection, when all human souls are judged and sent to either paradise or hell. God grants this request, and that is the exact moment Iblis declares his eternal intention to deceive and corrupt mortals, promising to strike them from the front, the back, the right, and the left, except for God's chosen, sincere servants. God allows this dangerous plan, stating clearly that whoever chooses to follow Iblis will join him in the fires of hell. There is a massive amount of theological data to unpack from this story. First, notice that his disobedience before God is not a militarized, armed rebellion like the one described by John Milton in Paradise Lost, where Satan leads a literal civil war against the throne of heaven. Instead, it is a simple, stubborn refusal to follow a direct commandment. You might ask, why were the angels and jinn supposed to bow to a creature of dust in the first place? The Quran does not state the answer outright, and Muslims have debated this mystery for centuries. What is clear is that his defiance does not reflect an attempt to overthrow God. It simply reflects his deep-seated arrogance and tribal prejudice. Furthermore, Iblis does not hide his dark intentions, and God explicitly postpones his punishment so that he can carry them out. This highlights a vitally important idea articulated repeatedly in the Quran. Evil exists not because God is weak or unable to stop it, but because he explicitly allows it to exist as a mechanism for human free will and spiritual testing. For example, Surah 6, verse 112 reads, "And thus we have made for every prophet an enemy devils from mankind and jinn, inspiring to one another decorative speech and delusion. But if your Lord had willed, they would not have done it." So Iblis is never conceptualized as God's equal archenemy. Despite these unique theological differences, the Islamic concept of Iblis is historically connected to the character of Satan in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian devil. In fact, many modern linguistic scholars believe that the name Iblis, which does not appear in any known text prior to the rise of Islam, may actually derive from the Greek word diabolos, which is the root of the English word devil and diabolical. Though it is unclear exactly how diabolos morphed phonetically into Iblis, this linguistic shift is still highly debated. Other linguistic theories link the name to Arabic verbal roots, meaning to despair or to fall into confusion. Although the specific story of Satan refusing to bow down before Adam does not appear in the canonical Christian Bible, remarkably similar versions do show up in several pre-Islamic Christian apocryphal texts that were circulating throughout the Middle East in late antiquity. One striking example is the Syriac Christian text known as the Book of the Cave of Treasures, which scholars date well before the composition of the Quran. In that ancient text, God presents Adam in a glorious manner to the angels, who are then commanded to worship him. When the prince of the lower order of angels saw the great majesty bestowed upon Adam, he became deeply jealous and refused to worship him, telling his followers, "You shall not worship him, for it is more seemly that he should worship me because I am fire and spirit, and not that I should worship a thing of dust." A nearly identical story appears in a 4th century Coptic text from Egypt, where the Archbishop Timothy of Alexandria describes God placing a crown on Adam's head and commanding worship, but Satan refuses out of intense pride, claiming he existed long before humans came into being. These striking parallels suggest a shared conceptual framework across the ancient Near East and highlight how the Quran beautifully engages with, adapts, and reinterprets existing regional traditions, situating them within its own strict monotheistic theology. As we mentioned earlier, most modern Muslims agree that Iblis was a jinn, not an angel. Today, angels and jinn are understood as entirely distinct supernatural species. Angels are God's perfectly obedient servants made of light, completely lacking free will, meaning they cannot sin. Jinn, on the other hand, are unpredictable creatures made of fire who possess full free will and can choose to be righteous Muslims or unjust sinners. However, early Islamic thought was not always this uniform. In fact, the idea that Iblis was originally a high-ranking angel had massive support during Islam's first several centuries. In the early 10th century, the famous Muslim historian and theologian al-Tabari affirmed that Iblis was indeed an angel, citing ancient reports claiming he was once a great angelic general named Azazel. According to these reports, Azazel led heavenly armies to defeat a group of corrupt jinn who were ruining the earth. After winning the war, he grew deeply proud of his military power, and this arrogance is what ultimately led to his defiance when ordered to bow to Adam. Interestingly, the name Azazel sounds almost identical to Azazel, a fallen angel mentioned in the ancient Jewish Book of Enoch, suggesting a deep cross-pollination of ideas between Jewish, Christian, and early Islamic thought. How is it possible that early Muslims could disagree so sharply about whether Iblis was an angel or a jinn? The answer lies in the complex wording of the Quran itself. Sometimes the text seems to include him among the angels, such as in Surah 15:31, which states, "So the angels prostrated, all of them entirely, except Iblis." At other points, it implies he is a jinn, stating he was made of fire. The most famous debated verse is Surah 18:50, which states, "We said to the angels, prostrate to Adam, and they prostrated except for Iblis. He was of the jinn, and departed from the command of his Lord." Proponents of the jinn theory argue that the grammar implies Iblis was simply a pious jinn who had been granted a seat on the heavenly council due to his high devotion, without actually being an angel himself, much like a teacher standing in a room full of students. Conversely, early theologians like al-Ash'ari argued that the phrase "he was of the jinn" actually meant he was from Jannan, meaning he was of heavenly origin, as opposed to Adam's earthly clay. For nearly 1,400 years, Muslim mystics, intellectuals, and poets have offered striking interpretations of this fall. The early Sufi mystic Mansur al-Hallaj famously saw Iblis's fall as a profound tragedy of ultimate devotion rather than mere arrogance. In al-Hallaj's view, Iblis refused to bow to Adam because his love for God was so absolute that he refused to bow to times anyone times else, even if it meant defying a direct command and suffering eternal damnation. Later, mystics like Ain al-Qudat Hamadani even proposed that Iblis and his devils act as necessary servants of God, performing a sacred divine service by clearly separating the righteous from the sinful. While these ideas were considered highly fringe, and both mystics were unfortunately executed for heresy, they testify to the immense depth of thought this story inspired. Moving away from the domain of intellectual elites, Islamic folklore often embraced the wild idea that Satan and his devils could inspire great works of art and music. One of the most celebrated poets of early Islam, Abu Nuwas, frequently invoked Iblis as his personal artistic muse in verses celebrating wine and forbidden love, jokingly writing that obeying Uncle Iblis was a duty. In the classic tales of the 1001 Nights, several legends feature master musicians who are said to have studied their otherworldly skills directly under Iblis. This connection between spirits and the performing arts is incredibly old, dating back to pre-Islamic Arabia, where poets believed their verses were dictated by a personal jinn. This historical context is precisely why the Quran repeatedly emphasizes that Muhammad is not times a poet, explicitly separating divine revelation from demonic or spirited inspiration. Today, Iblis remains a potent universal symbol of temptation, pride, and sin. But, as with all great religious figures, his interpretation is far from simple. For over a millennium, his narrative has served as a mirror for humanity to explore the delicate tensions between free will and divine commandment, arrogance and devotion, rebellion and servitude. He is a reminder that in the study of world religions, things are rarely as simple as they appear on the surface. Thank you for watching, remember to subscribe, and I will see you next time.